All right, thank you very much. So welcome, my name is Guido Jouret. I work for a company called ABB, not Airbnb, but ABB, a Swedish automation company. And I'm here to share with you some lessons learned about how we unlock the creativity of humans. And it's a great follow-on from the presentation from Intel just earlier. So first, I want to give you a little bit of context. A lot of presentations you're hearing today might be around the consumer area. I'm going to talk about industrial, and I'm going to talk about manufacturing as a proof point of that. And really to give you a sense, if you go back 130 years ago when our company was founded, it was really the beginning of the first industrial revolution. Muscle power being replaced by steam power in the second revolution being replaced with electrical motion. In the third industrial revolution in the 1970s, we introduced computers. The first industrial PCs, programmable logic controllers showed up in the factories. And now we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And the main difference is that in the third industrial revolutions, we're talking about things that were programmed explicitly to follow rules, to act and react. And what's happening now, thanks to the power of AI, as you heard from the previous presenter, is we're starting to envisage systems that plan and learn. And this is a revolution. And what we're doing about that is we don't believe that we want to turn ourselves from a hardware company into a software company. We want to combine hardware, software, connectivity, cloud, AI, data analytics. And that's going to change everything that today is deployed on the factory floor. The best manifestation of that, of course, are robots. And we're starting to deploy robots pretty much everywhere. We're the second largest manufacturer of robots. So everything from fixed robots, collaborative robots, robots that move. And the key impact of this is that we're able to replace what we call the 3 Ds, jobs that are dirty, dangerous, or dull. And this will boost productivity. Also, we're implementing technology such as software applications that we can download to our electrical drives. These are devices that connect to motors, and they control their speed, so they can go slowly, faster, so it's part of a drivetrain. And the reason why that's important is because 50% of the world's electrical power is consumed by electrical motors. And this is before envisaging the wholesale migration towards the electrification of all forms of transportation. So these drives are becoming intelligent. They can sense, they can respond, they can add more value. And then lastly, we're wrapping all of this into what we call ABB Ability, which is our term for a set of solutions, which is this hardware, the software, the connectivity, the intelligence in the cloud, so that we can sell products or we can sell outcomes and we can move to subscription models, just like you're seeing in the software industry. That's also now coming to the industrial space. So if we look to the factory of the future, it won't be a place that is dirty, dangerous, or dull. It'll be increasingly high tech. And we're doing this to ourselves. We have 293 factories of our own. So we're sipping our own champagne or eating our own dog food, depending on the phrase that you prefer. And one of the ways we do that is by increasingly going to sensing everything. So low-cost sensors enabled by the consumer revolutions of the Raspberry Pi, cheap compute, cheap connectivity, is starting to make everything that can be connected will be connected. Secondly, the availability of robots, not only fixed in place, such as today 70% of robots are deployed just in automotive, but they're starting to show up in food and beverage industries, in high-tech manufacturing, electronics. And these robots are now starting to move. So they're automatic guided vehicles or mobots, mobile robots, collaborative robots working side by side with people, especially with the advent of 5G, next generation Wi-Fi. All of these will become untethered, and we can track where they are. And this gives us not only efficiency, but also agility, the ability to adapt. And then lastly, what's called kitting, the idea that AI with vision systems will allow these robots to then pick things out of bins, put them into trays, and that's great for logistics and shipping. And what's happening is that for a long time, at least since the 1970s, we've had this, what we call the control loop. And this is where the industrial PCs, the programmable logic controllers, essentially sense, they analyze, and they act. But they're following rule-based systems. They're not really imagining what could happen if they see an exception. They don't know how to deal with boundary conditions. They don't know how to respond to unplanned events. But now if you add AI, we're starting to see the emergence of what we call the asset loop. The ability to use those same sensors, but additional AI technology, to start looking at things like predictive maintenance, asset utilization. So what we're trying to do is overall boost the effectiveness of the assets in a factory. The average factory is only used at about 45% of its potential today, and we can do much better than that. And so by connecting everything in a factory, we start to get data back, we start to improve operations, we start to make things more efficient, lower cost, but we also get to what we call lot size 1, the ability to make products down to ideally an individual lot size of 1 with the same scale and efficiency as 10,000 of those devices. And for customers, this is going to allow them to create a lot more value, get more flexibility, faster response, and we have to do this. And the reason why we have to do this is because from 1990 till 2010, productivity in manufacturing went up by 4% per year. Since 2010, it's been 1%, and now it's probably gone down to about 0. So if we want blue-collar jobs in manufacturing to allow workers to earn more, we need to boost their productivity. So the driver for this adoption of digital technology, it's all about productivity. And without this productivity boost, we will not be able to sustain manufacturing jobs in the Western world. They will just simply erode to low-cost countries. And we can't bring great, good quality blue-collar jobs back, which allows those people to access the middle class. So we think that what's really going to happen is this combination of AI and people, because the best combination is to essentially create autonomous systems, but it's not a binary thing. It's not like it's no people or all people. It's a combination. And the reason why I believe this combination is great is because people are really good at certain things. We're terrible at adding numbers, keeping calculations going in our head, but we're really good at being adaptable, responding to change, understanding context, and being creative. AI systems, Terminator notwithstanding, it's really all about task automation today. The AI system that can recognize objects on an assembly line cannot drive your car. The one that is great at playing games cannot be diagnosing you for medical illnesses. They're task-based. And this combination of technology, people with what they're good at, AI system with what they're good at, this combination means that the vast majority of work will be enabled with AI technology in some way, augmented by AI technology. And this is why I like this term of humane, because I believe that if we do it right, it'll make jobs more interesting, more fulfilling, and allow people to focus on what they're good at and allow the technology to do its part. But we know that a lot of people are afraid of technology. And in fact, in 2013, there was an Oxford Business School study that said that 47% of jobs would be eliminated by automation. So in 2017, Pew Research asked Americans whether they were afraid of automation, and 74% said yes. Last year, NPR asked Americans if they thought that robots were going to take their jobs, and 94% of Americans said no. So I guess what that means is they're not afraid for their jobs, but yours, on the other hand, not so sure. So I think what we have to do is we have to demystify this. So last year, we commissioned some research with the Economist Intelligence Unit, or EIU, and we asked whether or not countries are ready for automation. Because one thing is clear. If we go back 130 years ago when our company was founded, over 90% of people worked on a farm. They grew food, they lived on the farm, that's their life. Today in the United States, less than 2% of people live on the farm and work in agriculture. We grow more food than ever before. But we've had 4 generations to adapt to this change. And one thing for sure is this 4th industrial revolution will be very rapid, it'll be very broad, it will impact all kinds of work, And we believe that net, it actually will create jobs. Forecasts exist that show that there's a destruction of jobs. There's also forecasts that show that net jobs will be created. Forrester Research, for example, says there'll be a net creation of 15 million jobs. But we commissioned this study to ask 54 questions in 3 different areas and ask, are countries ready for automation? And these 54 questions fall into 3 buckets. The first one is innovation ecosystem, which is, what are you doing to foster innovation, whether it's R&D grants, whether it's creating incubators, whether it's setting the right regulatory framework to nurture and sustain startups? The second one is regarding labor market policies. So what are you doing to not only train the workers of today, but also retrain workers that are impacted by automation? And the third is, what are you doing in terms of education, not only primary, secondary, but also vocational training, retraining, and things like that? And out of that study, which was 20 of the top economies in the world, plus 5 middle and lower income countries, just to mix it up a bit. Number 1, South Korea. Great broadband infrastructure. The government is really pushing AI, highly educated workforce, both in university training as well as in vocational. Germany was second. Government, again, very much pushing towards Industry 4.0, boosting the productivity of German workers in those middle-sized companies that Germany is well known for. They also have an excellent vocational training system. And third is Singapore. Great infrastructure, very progressive government, very keen for the government to play a role in nurturing and fostering and sustaining innovation, very quick to embrace that technology. And the United States is number 9 in this ranking, mainly held back by quality of infrastructure, quality of primary and secondary education, and also in terms of, even though, of course, we have Silicon Valley, we have great startups, we have great universities, but in terms of this nurturing of innovation and sustaining innovation compared to what we had in the past with things like DARPA, sponsoring the grand challenges, for example, that investment has waned. And as a result, the US has fallen back in terms of its readiness for automation. So the conclusions of that study were interesting because at the end of the day, you shouldn't take too much sort of solace from the fact that these 3 countries were top, because no country really did very, very well. In fact, even though South Korea came out tops, at the end of the day, the vast majority of countries are not prepared. There's not enough going on to prepare people for the impact and the transition of automation, which, as I said before, will be extremely rapid, a single generation. There's more engagement required between the government and the employers and stakeholders. And, of course, the opinions about the impact of automation are highly speculative. One thing is for sure, it's easy to see the jobs of today that will be impacted. It is far harder to imagine and envisage the jobs of tomorrow. For example, if you had said 20 years ago that you wanted to be a search engine optimizer, I'm not sure that your parents would have understood that that was a real job. So we need, however, to get ready for a great deal of creativity and automation. And the reason is, what you see in the headlines is not what the underlying numbers show. If you go by the headlines, you would say, wow, the coal industry is getting hammered, all these coal miners are losing jobs, this is a huge problem. The reality is that there are far more empty positions for truck drivers than there are coal miners working in the United States today. There's 600,000 jobs in manufacturing we can't fill. There's 6 million jobs overall we can't fill. There's several 100,000 jobs in cybersecurity we can't fill. There are vast parts of the economy where we don't have enough people. But what I want to do is I want to take you forward and talk about why, and the time is urgent, we're going to need a lot of automation. And the reason is iOS. And I'm not talking about iOS 13 that Apple announced this week. I'm talking about the industrial operating system, the way we run our planet. And things are actually fairly dire. So we have 7 billion people on the planet going to over 9, so a rough increase of about 30%, and that's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years. We waste a tremendous amount of food, the way we grow it today in large centralized farms. We have a tremendous problem with water, and as climate change happens, parts of the world will get drier, and those dry regions will lead to mass migration, as we've seen in North Africa, people migrating to Europe, causing instability in those countries. We also waste a lot of our energy, moving water, treating water, and the way we farm today, the way we grow food, is wiping out the arable land. And in fact, this is leading to the fact that we've already lost about a third of the arable land, and there's only about 30% of the planet left covered with trees or jungle or forests. And this we cannot chop down to feed another 30% of the people. So there's an urgent need for what I call iOS 2.0. We need a new way of running the world without consuming the earth. So what would that look like? Well, first of all, we urgently need to get off of fossil fuels. We need to go towards renewable energy. So in California, it's up to about 35% of the energy mix is coming from renewables. The average for the United States is 20. The nice thing about renewables is there's no net fuel consumption. But the other nice thing about renewables is 45%, well, first of all, water. Let me talk about water and why it impacts energy. We live on a blue planet, covered in water. But only 1% of that water is water we can access and drink. Of that 1%, we spend 45% of it cooling nuclear power plants, gas turbines, oil and coal-powered plants that are generating electricity, more than we use for farming or for human consumption. The nice thing about renewables, they consume almost no water. They have no fuel costs. In fact, it's even better. In Germany in 2018, there were 100 days in the year when the actual price of electricity dipped to below zero. The infrastructure was already built, solar farms, wind farms, the rest. So the more we can get off of fossil fuels, we waste less, we consume less water, we generate clean energy that we need to get CO2 levels down. That will take a lot of jobs, actually. Because if we were able to get the rest of the United States to the same level of renewable energy as California, it would create more jobs than in the oil, coal, and natural gas industry combined. And that's only at 35%. If we take it all the way to 100%, it'll be 3 times more. But there's a big problem with renewables. You can't store the energy. What do? What do you do at night? Wind turbines will blow, but what do you do about solar? So one of the world's largest is in Australia, the Hornsdale battery. It's 100 megawatt hours. That's, to give you a sense, it's about 1,000 Tesla cars. And this battery acts as a backup. It helps to stabilize the grid. And it's been so effective that this battery will pay for itself in less than 2 years. So as you can imagine, a lot of utilities around the world are now looking to figure out how to do that. But we don't have to just build batteries. In fact, we can, just like your TiVo, we can not only time shift, we can place shift electricity. So our company invented something called high voltage direct current. And this allows you to send electricity over extremely long distances, about 2,000 miles, with less than 1% loss. So for example, when it gets dark on the East Coast, they could have solar farms in Texas sending renewable energy to keep the lights on. This is happening right now from Northern California to Southern California, from the deserts in China to the cities. So this technology allows the potential for remote wind and solar installations to supply energy to cities far away. But we may not have to build many of these batteries because we're going to put them in all the things that move. We're going to electrify all forms of transportation. So trains are already well underway, cars are coming next, and planes will also go either hybrid or will go electric. And in fact, this is going to start, and while people may be skeptical and they say, well, Guido, you know, in the United States, we're not even at 2% of electric vehicles penetration yet in terms of new car sales. What people don't realize about an S-curve is that it takes about as long to go from 0.1% adoption to 1%, than to go from 1 to 50. China's already at 5. So, in fact, China has 470 electric vehicle companies. So all forms of transportation will get electrified, and when that happens, we'll have distributed battery storage. Because one of the capabilities we can enable is what's called vehicle to grid, which basically means that sometimes you charge your car, and sometimes your car charges the grid. This will help lower the cost of transportation for consumers, and will lead to one of the biggest boons in terms of consumer credit, because this will put money back into your pocket. Already by the next 2 years, electric vehicles will become cheaper than internal combustion engine cars. But let's get back to water for a moment, because we waste a lot of water. We use a lot of water. Water is heavy. But water can also be used as a way of storing energy. The Norwegians pump water uphill when the Danes have too much energy from their wind turbines, and they store that energy as potential energy in fjords and let it run downhill to powered turbines. Now, we need to also think about providing fresh water using desalination. The only problem with that is about half the cost of desalinating water is electrical energy cost. But as we've seen with renewables, since the cost of fuel is zero, and if there are days when, in fact, as the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, that the wholesale cost of power dips to below zero, you go and desalinate some water. You get paid to do that. As an interesting byproduct, the Japanese have discovered that there are trace amounts of lithium in seawater as well. So as a byproduct, in order to create all these batteries, you can actually mine the seawater and get lithium out of that. But we need to also think about how we distribute and waste less of the water. So while it's perfectly legal to put solar panels on your roof pretty much everywhere these days, and it's actively encouraged with tax subsidies, it's actually illegal in 9 US states to capture the rainwater that falls on your house. And even in Colorado, where it's not illegal, they only allow you 100 gallons, which is about enough for a family of 4 for 1 day. So Mark Twain said, "Whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over." And he was right. So we have to think about how do we get creative about capturing the rainwater that's already falling on our roof and use that at the very least for things like your laundry, for watering your garden, for gray water in your toilets. All of that should be relatively easy to do. And in fact, in a calculation I did last year, I discovered that about half the US could be self-sufficient in water based upon just capturing rainwater falling on those roofs today. But we also have to think about the food, how we're going to feed a planet of 9 billion plus people. And this is a real dilemma because in certain countries, there's a real problem. The average age of farmers in Japan is 67. That's the average. So very soon, they're not going to have an agricultural industry left. If we seal our southern border, we're not going to have anybody to pick our crops. We need to figure out a better way to grow food. Because the way we're doing it today with iOS 1.0, we're losing topsoil, way too much fertilizer, pesticides, all of that is bad for us. And we don't have the land. We don't have the other 30% more planet that we can use to grow food the way we're doing it now. So one of the ways we're going to get around this is no longer to grow food only in 2 dimensions, but in 3. So companies like Plenty.ag, for example, they're growing food in 3D warehouses where you can essentially imagine a greenhouse stack where you have tray upon tray of lettuce and vegetables and other produce. And then that is all tended to by robots so that you have a very high productivity to grow that food. That uses 90% less water, requires no pesticides, and we can grow that food right in the cities. Why is that important? Because by 2050, 2/3 of us will be living in cities. And 50% of the food we grow today rots or is wasted en route towards its final destination. By growing the food in urban warehouses close to where people live, we can minimize that. We can pick the crops just when they're needed. So, in conclusion, we need a lot of innovation. We need to get from iOS 1.0, this industrial operating system that is killing our planet, to iOS 2.0. We need to go to a system that is highly decentralized, based on renewable energy, where we take advantage of distributed systems connected by digital nervous systems with ever more autonomous systems so that we can manage these highly complicated and distributed assets in a coordinated way. That means we need to have better innovation in everything from material science, going towards solid-state batteries, new ways of growing crops, requiring minimal amounts of fertilizer. But we also need smart regulation. This concept that it's illegal to capture the rainwater falling on your roof is out of date. We need to have government leaning in to enable these kinds of opportunities so we nurture the right kind of innovation. And then lastly, if we do all of that, we can create new and innovative business models that will create a tremendous number of jobs, because each of these transformations we're talking about is something that has to happen very quickly. And people don't quite understand just how urgent this is, but we've only got about 20 years to do all of this. And if that sounds like a lot, just remember, we're able to do this. Tony Seba from Stanford pointed out that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were no cars, the electrical system had not been invented, and this country was able to create those two industries and fight a world war in less than 10 years. So if we put our minds to it, we get our best and our brightest working on these problems and these opportunities, I believe we can do this. But we're going to need every man, woman, and robot we can find. Thank you very much.